we're heading towards the end of the album, Adrian. Track number 14, Little Susie.
Father left home, poor mother died, leaving Susie alone.
This one here is really, I was looking online during the week, and this one's it's a bizarre track. And it's about a young girl was murdered. It's quite a tragic song. It's beautiful instrumentation in this track as well. Why do you think he included this track on the album when the first half is basically a classical piece?
That's a good question. Had he just put another track that was similar to, like, say, the first half of the album, which had the more R&B beats, like, you know, this time around, or Money, or DS, or Too Bad, it may have been too much in that direction. And then if you put something else that was overly pop, it may have lightened it too much.
Right.
Whereas this sort of fits in, I guess, as far as adding contrast to an album, something that's a little bit more smoother to listen to than him screaming This Time Around or Tabloid Junkie. Or
it's more delicate. It's a delicate song, but it's also a very tragic song about a girl who lost her life. But it's bizarre that he chose this one, and it's about a murder from, I guess, the 70s.
I guess, again, it sort of fits thematically, I guess, into the whole someone who's had an injustice done against them. You know, Michael talked about that in Scream and They Don't Care About Us, and this is sort of rounding it out, but in a different way. Sound-wise, I think it needed to be different to the rest of the album because there were a lot of angry and loud-sounding songs there. So this needed to kind of sort of counter that or balance that out. As to why that's there as opposed to a dozen other tracks that could have made the album, I guess it comes down to personal taste. Michael wanting to get the message of this song out more than something else that didn't make it.
Track number 15, the last track from the album. This is another cover. This is Smile.
Smile, what's the use of crying?
A gorgeous song written by Charlie Chaplin. Now, this is simply stunning. A lot of people have covered this. Barbra Streisand recently as well covered the song Smile. This apparently was going to be a single, but was pulled the last minute. Why do you think it was pulled the last minute? Why would you pull such a beautiful song for starters?
Well, so Smile was going to come out at the end of the sort of History, Blood on the Dance Floor era. It was slated as single number 3 from, I guess, the Blood on the Dance Floor onwards era. So Blood on the Dance Floor came out, then History with the remix and Ghosts on the B-side, and then Smile was going to come out. Michael, because he loves Charlie Chaplin, and you can see pictures of him from different eras in his life where he would dress up as Charlie and sort of mimic his moves. I mean, some of Charlie's moves have made it into Michael's dance moves over the years. A lot of the sort of vaudeville type things, you know, sort of like in his mannerisms and the way he walks and stuff. And the Smile video clip was going to be him as Charlie from the film The Kid, which came out in the early 20s, the 1920s. And so it was all set to go with Smile as the lead, the A side of the single, and Is It Scary, which we'll talk about, I guess, when we're talking Blood on the Dance Floor, as the B side to round out this whole campaign. And at the last minute, I guess somebody within Sony said, no, we don't want to do that. We don't want to put the money into it. Nobody's going to buy this. It's not going to be a hit. And they lost total confidence in it and just pulled the single from being released. But in the meantime, some singles had already been pressed, got out into various markets.
And a few got out.
A few got out.
You've got one.
I've got one. I do have one.
Can you show us the
I
single
yeah.
for
So
Smile?
I'll take it out of the case so you can see it clearly. But yeah, here is
Oh.
Smile. Where, this would have been the video clip, Michael dressed as Charlie. And there's the back.
And on the B side is some remixes of Is It Scary?
Yeah.
Okay.
So so in the 90s, we had a really big store in Melbourne called Blockbuster Music, which was the Virgin Megastore for a while, and then it changed hands and stuff. And me on one of my record shopping trips one Saturday, went into Blockbuster, had heard nothing about the Smile single coming out or anything, so I didn't even know it was happening. And there I am thumbing through the CD singles, and there's Smile. I'm like, okay, well, I'm grabbing that. Didn't think anything of it. There were two versions of the single. There was this one which had the jewel case, and I wish I could travel back in time and go and buy one of the other one as well, but there was a cardboard sleeve which just had Is It Scary and Smile on it.
Right.
But, bought it for $8 as singles were back then, thought nothing of it, and then find out that the single got pulled and that wasn't even meant to be there.
So you bought this in Australia. So obviously, was the single going to be released in Australia or all over the world?
Well, it's not an Aussie pressing. It is, or is it an Aussie pressing? No, it doesn't have anything Australia on it. I do believe it was just a European pressing that they were going to send everywhere.
Right.
So, yeah, we got it very, very briefly, but it was gone within days of it coming out.
So how much is that copy worth, you think, now?
You're not to tell anyone where I live, Leo.
Okay, I will not say where in Melbourne you live, Adrian, but...
Yeah, we know it's Melbourne. I said that. Basically, Discogs has copies occasionally popping up for around $2,000.
Wow.
So it is one of those where if I could travel back in time, I'd buy all of them. But I bought that, and I guess it's one of those prized pieces in my collection.
Do you remember back in the day where you bought that single, how many copies they had?
It wasn't like hundreds of them.
Right.
It was probably like, I want to say 6 or 7 of the cardboard sleeve, and probably about the same with the jewel case.
Okay, so less than 20.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I couldn't tell you if other stores had them,
Right.
or I just know it from my end, as in I walked into the store like I normally would on a Saturday afternoon.
Yeah.
As how old would I have been, 20 or thereabouts. And, yeah, just wandered into Blockbuster, saw, there's a new Michael single, grabbed it and went out.
Because once again, we always sort of say this on the podcast, but this was back in the day where you had no idea when things were going to come out. There wasn't like an online release schedule or anything like that. You just went to the store and it was there.
And there was also no promotion for this either. It wasn't like our street press of the day, like Impress or Beat Magazine or any of those had ads saying new Michael single or someone reviewing it or anything.
No, it
just randomly was there.
Appeared.
And then as soon as it appeared, it disappeared.
So Smile was the last song on History, the second CD. Of course, the first CD has got all the hits on it. We've finished the track by track.
Mm-hmm.
Overall, how would you describe the new songs on History?
As being very different to the old songs.
Right, yeah.
I think a lot of people have made the mistake over the years of saying, okay, these songs aren't as good because they're not like his hits. Not like his older hits. They weren't meant to be. Michael wasn't necessarily about reinventing his past, if that makes sense. This album as a whole was a statement of where he was at the time and where he was moving.
And his responses. Yeah. Because it was a very different album to, Off the Wall, Thriller, Bad, and there's songs on this album which I absolutely love and still play a lot today. I think like people like Scream and They Don't Care About Us, Stranger in Moscow, Earth Song, Childhood, You're Not Alone. So there's a good chunk on this album that I still play a lot today because it's such a brilliant album, and combined with the first disc reminding people just how good Michael's catalogue is and the hits that he had. No surprising, this album had a budget of like over 30 million in promotion and marketing. Went number one all over the world in 20 countries, including the US, UK, Australia, New Zealand. Over 20 million copies sold. It was nominated for 6 Grammys, won 1 for Best Video for Scream. Should have won more Grammys than that. I think it should have won a lot more Grammys than that, just personally. But this was a really, I think, important time in Michael's career because he was responding to all the noise that happened, and we were getting to hear his side, what he was feeling through these new songs.
It was his story.
Yeah, it was his story.
Literally.
It was his story. So your lasting comments on the album?
Yeah, like you, I probably play a good 7 to 8 of the tracks often. These songs aren't background noise. It's not something I can listen to while doing the dishes or whatever. I have to be in that sort of mood where it's like, it's Scream, feeling that whole oomph of it. Same with They Don't Care About Us, or History, or Tabloid Junkie, say. The slower songs, like I said with You Are Not Alone, I don't gravitate to the slower songs as much, but I can appreciate them for what they are. And, some of Michael's most beautiful vocals are on the slow songs. Yeah. Listen to Smile and just listen to his voice in that. We were talking about Little Susie being a contrast to the beginning of the album. Scream's the one where he comes out all angry saying, stop messing with me, blah, blah, blah. And the opposite is Smile. That's the complete opposite. It's the bookend. The whole album is a journey. And what you're supposed to come out of this is like, it's almost like just let it go. Find things that make you happy. After Thriller, History is definitely my favourite album. It's the one I guess I most connect to. By default, Sound Museum, as your podcast talks about your connection to things.
To music, yeah.
And this was the era where I really connected to Michael's music more than any other album. So it will always have a really special place for me.
It's all about that timing as well, because we all sort of know where we were. I was working in retail in Auckland at the time, in music retail, and this album was just huge. It was a massive album, and I've always been a fan of Michael Jackson, and hearing these songs and I guess his responses to all the crap that went on, his response is, this is what I was feeling, these are my thoughts and lyrics. And yeah, there's quite a few tracks that we'll touch upon finally, Adrian. There's a few tracks that didn't make the album, but there was a few tracks that were recorded or partly recorded that didn't quite make it. Let's just run through a handful of tracks, of track titles that were sort of around the internet. In the Black was recorded during the History sessions apparently, and was considered for Blood on the Dance Floor. But this was a track on the Ultimate Collection box in 2004. So that one did get a release.
It did, yeah. So the sort of Ultimate Collection had a few sort of unreleased tracks and B-sides and things that didn't make it onto the other albums. In the Black, I've probably only listened to a handful of times, so I don't have a lot of intel or gossip or anything about that one. But yeah, again, I mean, it sort of fitted into that whole sound and vibe that he was doing with this album.
Family Thing was for the Addams Family Values movie, I believe.
So Family Thing was going to be the lead track. No, it was going to be a track in the film.
Right.
And in return, the Addams Family or members of the Addams Family appeared in Michael's film it's this scary, which then got reshot as Ghosts. But,
Right.
we'll talk more about Ghosts later.
Yes.
Family Thing I don't think was ever completed. I think when the sort of deal with the Addams Family fell through, or the people making that second film fell through, that the song didn't get completed. But there is an incomplete version that's sort of around on YouTube and stuff, which, sort of has Michael walking through the lyrics, or at least the sound of what the melody would be with incomplete lyrics and just the chorus.
Faces from 1994 was going to be a duet with Nelson Mandela.
Yeah.
Now, apparently Michael recorded, I guess, a vocal, almost like maybe a guide vocal, apparently. But it didn't really progress from there.
Faces was sort of, I guess, sketched out, because, it is a demo still.
Yes.
It was sketched out with Michael sort of doing the spoken vocal at the beginning, where he sent that to Nelson Mandela's people to, hopefully get Nelson to do that vocal bit at the front. Nelson's team were like, because of all the negative press that Michael was getting at the time, said, no, we don't want him to do this. So it kind of got shelved. Musically, I think it sounds similar-ish but different to They Don't Care About Us.
Right.
But if that was released as a single, that would have been huge had it got to completion.
These next...
And again, that's out on YouTube. That got leaked a couple of years back.
Yeah, there's a lot of these tracks are on YouTube or online somewhere, but being a podcast, we're not going to play unreleased tracks because we don't want to get sued.
But do look out for that one.
Yes.
Google, YouTube search, Faces on YouTube, because it is well worth a listen and would have been a centerpiece of the History album had it got to completion. Totally. It's brilliant.
These next three are probably all rough instrumentals. Revenge, RSDD, and Verdict, all from 1994.
Don't know much about any of those.
Ones? Okay, so these are all from a fan page. I got all this stuff from. So I'm just going to go through this list, Adrian.
That's not to say they don't exist. A handful of people may have heard it.
Yeah.
These snippets may have leaked out, named other things.
Yes.
Or the songs or the titles that you're listing could evolve into songs that did get released.
Correct.
So,
if you know any of these tracks or have any more information, let us know on our socials. Sound Museum AU. Willing and Waiting, from also the same year, 1994. This was a song that Babyface wrote and submitted to Michael for History, but Michael declined, apparently.
Babyface worked on a few bits and pieces with Michael in the 90s. There was a song called On the Line, which ended up as sort of like an extra song when you bought the Blood on the Dance Floor and Ghosts box set. It was a CD single.
Yeah.
And it was also in a movie as well. Can't remember the name for the life of me, but that doesn't matter. And so Babyface worked on that with Michael. The 3T's, the song which became 3T's duet with Michael called Why.
Yeah.
That was a Babyface song as well, which Michael kind of recorded the chorus, which you hear in the 3T song, and then decided that wasn't the sound he was doing for History or what he was, where the album was progressing.
Yeah.
So then he passed it on to 3T, whose album he was producing or co-producing anyway, because they were on his record label in the 90s.
Yeah. One last question. Obviously, Scream was the lead single from the album with Sister Janet. Do you think the pair worked on another project or another song for the album, or was it always just Scream?
It was always just Scream, as far as, from my understanding from seeing different podcasts and things. Jam and Lewis, Michael wanted to work with Jam and Lewis because he really loved Rhythm Nation and wanted some of that vibe or sounds to make it to History. Right. He saw those sounds as working with what he wanted to do thematically. And so when he first got in touch with them, they submitted 2 or 3 very rough sketches of songs as far as instrumentals or just loops for him to work on. And out of the 3, Michael picked the one that would become Scream to work on. And the one that Janet really wanted out of those and hoped that Michael wouldn't pick was what became her song Runaway.
Okay, right.
So you can sort of see the contrasting sounds of what could have worked on History. But
Right.
Michael went for the sounds that
Scream.
ended up being Scream.
Yeah. Adrian, thank you so much for joining me on this first podcast episode celebrating the 30th anniversary of Michael Jackson's History album. It's been great to sort of have a chat about the album and the tracks from the album. Join us next week for a special bonus episode. Now, you're coming back and we're going to talk about the Blood on the Dance Floor remix album. There's some new tracks on the album. There's some remixes. There's also the Ghost short film as well to talk about. And also some remixes of the singles from History. And a couple of remixes from his old stuff, like Beat It and Rock With You and stuff. So next week is going to be a bit of a bonus. Blood on the Dance Floor, Ghosts, remixes, other Michael Jackson stuff. So join us next week on that bonus. But thank you so much for joining me, Adrian.
Thank you, Leo. And I look forward to talking more about the History and Blood on the Dance Floor eras in the next episode.
And as always, make sure you follow the podcast on your chosen podcast provider. If you're using Spotify or Apple Music, make sure you leave me a lovely review. Make sure you give me 5 stars. It all helps with the podcast and getting it in the search engines and all that type of stuff. It all helps. And I will see you next week for a special bonus episode celebrating the King of Pop, Michael Jackson. Take care.